Hospitals are filling up with COVID-19 patients once again as the battle against the virus reaches a critical point. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Matt Templeman.
I'm Renee McCullough. Tonight we are taking an exclusive look inside one of our local intensive care units to show you what the war on COVID looks like nearly 2 years into the pandemic.
KEZI 9 News reporter Mike Cerullo has more in our special report on the front lines.
Throughout the pandemic, many of us have been fixated on the numbers. The number of new daily COVID cases, the number of people who've lost their lives, and the number of people fighting in the hospital for survival. But as we face a new foe, the Omicron variant, we wanted to go deeper than just the numbers. That's why I went inside one of Western Oregon's ICUs to give you a glimpse of what doctors, nurses, and patients are seeing every day on the front lines of COVID.
We're tired, but I know everybody's tired. Just bear with us. We're doing the best we can.
If you're in the intensive care unit, often you're fighting for survival. You're fighting for your life.
These are real people with real families who are making a real contribution to the community who no longer will be able to do that.
This is the intensive care unit at Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center in Corvallis, a place for the sickest of sick and where some of the toughest battles are fought.
I did have the thought, I hope this isn't the last time I see my wife.
No one knows that better than Bruce Sams.
When I first woke up, I can't tell you that I had any real or coherent thoughts. I know that I was looking around trying to figure out where I was, what was going on.
As a firefighter in McMinnville, Bruce is someone who saves lives nearly every day. But this summer, it was his own life on the line.
I don't think everybody always thought I was going to be fine.
It all started at the end of July. He was returning to the station after a call when he started to feel sick. He went home early, not thinking anything of it, but over the next few days, his symptoms got progressively worse.
Fifth or sixth day, breathing was becoming noticeably more difficult. And on the 8th day, my wife took me over to the emergency room.
It wasn't long before Bruce took a turn for the worse. He spent about 3 days deteriorating in the ER before being intubated and moved into the ICU. Bruce doesn't remember much, but his doctor, Brian Delmonico, remembers it well.
He was very, very sick and was one of those patients with COVID who had a high chance of dying.
He says the main reason Bruce is still alive today is because of the Seraph filter.
It's a type of dialysis that involves removing the patient's blood from a catheter, usually in the jugular vein, washing the blood or cleaning it with the filter.
The blood is then returned to the patient with a much lower amount of virus in it. Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center is the first and only hospital in the Pacific Northwest using the filter.
With the filter, within the first 60 hours of being in the intensive care unit, the mortality rate is decreased by about 37 to 42%.
It's been used on 15 critically ill patients, including Bruce. 6 survived, but he's still feeling the after effects of the virus.
Because I don't breathe very well still, I don't have very much at all endurance or stamina. It was really hard for probably 2 months, and it's not easy yet today.
Bruce is one of the lucky ones. Just like the vast majority of patients fighting COVID in the ICU, he was unvaccinated. Just last week, the CDC released data saying the risk of hospitalization is 8 times higher for unvaccinated people than for those who are fully vaccinated. Dr. Delmonico says as soon as Bruce's bed opened up, another patient took his spot. He says the cycle is a familiar one at the Corvallis ICU, a smaller unit with just 12 beds that's seen little relief in the past 2 years.
Our intensive care unit is, if not full, nearly full most days and nights, and our staff is quite busy.
Busy fighting against a virus that's already claimed the lives of well over 5,000 Oregonians and more than 800,000 people nationwide.
We definitely have had more death in our ICU in the last 2 years than we have, in my career.
And this close-knit team at the Corvallis ICU is gearing up for yet another battle, this time against the highly transmissible Omicron variant. COVID cases are already exploding nationwide.
It doesn't seem to be coming to an end.
We have lost some experienced nurses just because they've gone to other, a little less stressful specialties. And then nurses have gone for becoming travelers.
Across the state, more than 800 people are currently in hospitals with COVID-19. That's fewer than 400 away from the peak of the Delta surge recorded on September 1st. The latest projections from Oregon Health and Science University predict Omicron hospitalizations will eclipse that number by the end of January. It's data the chief executive officer at Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center has been watching closely.
Right now, you just have such an overwhelming demand for healthcare services. We don't have enough people to provide the care.
Laura Henham says there's been pent-up demand for hospital beds since many people shied away from seeking medical care the past 2 years.
This is valuable real estate inside of any hospital, and it's critical that we keep our beds available for those who need the beds the most.
But now that delay in care is catching up to many people who waited too long and are facing the consequences because of it. It's a trend ICU nurse Candice Macarone says she's been seeing as the surge settles in.
People held off getting checked out for their heart, and then they had a heart attack, or they have been having headaches and come in and they've had a brain bleed.
In some places, caregivers are getting out of the business at record rates. Macarone says some of her former coworkers have succumbed to burnout, and it's creating a new challenge for those they've left behind.
Even though there's an empty bed doesn't necessarily mean there's somebody to take care of that patient.
Nurses are now squeezed between the increasing workload and a state of exhaustion as the pandemic that appears to be never-ending rages on.
I still love my job. I still love being a nurse. But I think the passion is getting I need a little bit of a refresher. I think we all do.
Through all of this, doctors say there is a light at the end of the tunnel, with the vaccine playing a big role.
A lot of people are getting sick and testing positive for COVID. Thankfully, the vaccination rate for our hospital staff and our community is significantly high, and that helps keep our community out of the hospital.
And Dr. Delmonico says with the Omicron variant, more patients are being admitted to hospitals around the country than ever before. But the vast majority are not sick enough to end up inside the ICU.
And there's been some new therapies, some repurposing of old therapies that have been helpful for patients with COVID-19. And then we've learned a lot through the 2+ years of the pandemic on how to help people who are really sick from COVID.
For Bruce Sams, his life is much different than it was 6 months ago, before he got COVID. He's now on light duty, no longer fighting fires on the front lines. But he's optimistic that others in his situation will get the care they need.
I think there are technologies and treatments that are going to hopefully be found and used.
And he's thankful for those still on the front lines who helped save his life.
I'm very grateful. Enjoy my family, my wife. God still seems to think that I have a purpose here and that I can stay here.
Leadership at Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center say there will be more stories like Bruce's. They say they've learned so much about caring for COVID patients during the past 2 years, and as they brace for the predicted peak of this surge, the hospital is stocked with supplies, and their team is ready to adapt as quickly and effectively as possible to the next curveball thrown their way. Reporting in the studio, Mike Cerullo, KEZI 9 News.